Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your gateway to uncovering hidden insights and illuminating mysteries. I'm thrilled you've joined our global community. Whether you're watching from a bustling city skyline or a quiet countryside, we're glad you're here. Globe showing Europe, Africa, so tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Chapter 1, The Invitation at Highfell Court. Hercule Poirot did not often accept country house invitations, particularly when November lay like a grey shawl over the landscape. The English countryside, to his mind, had charms best appreciated through glass, hedgerows framed like pictures, lawns kept in military formation, rain observed at a decent distance. Yet the letter that brought him to Highfell Court had been written with a hand both steady and urgent. Lady Margaret Highfell, widow of the late Sir Bertram, had appealed not to his vanity, which was delicate, nor to his reputation, which was robust, but to his sense of tidy justice. A matter of some delicacy among dear friends, and a thing stolen that cannot simply be replaced. It was the last phrase that persuaded him. Things lost to time could be mourned, things stolen required correction. On the morning of his journey, Poirot arranged his valise with the precision that soothed his soul. The shirts were folded in even layers. His brushes were aligned, bristles to the left, handles to the right. A small bottle of hair tonic nestled beside a pair of gloves so immaculate they might have been sculpted from cream. He paused before the mirror, coaxing his moustaches to their fine, symmetrical points. One last glance at his hat, a bowler, napped smooth, completed the ritual. Order first, adventure later. The train south ran like a thin steel thread through damp fields. Poirot sat in a clean compartment, his back to the engine, and read Lady Margaret's letter again. Her handwriting, though spare, possessed character. She declined to name suspects, justified this with delicacy, and requested only that he come as a guest, not as a policeman. Poirot smiled. "ABN," he murmured. "As a guest I will look, as a detective I will see." Outside, November worked at the world with cold fingers. Local station slid past, brick, ivy-scratched, tidy as a village postcard. The porter at Highfell Holt knew of Lady Margaret's carriage and took Poirot's valise as if feeling briefly the weight of civilization. The drive to the house climbed a shallow ridge. Highfell Court appeared not suddenly but as the inevitable end to a measured argument, a broad, grey facade, many-windowed, the stone darkened and dignified by rain. A clock in the stable-yard struck 4, 3 minutes late by Poirot's watch. He frowned by habit, though he told himself that in the provinces time sometimes adopted the unhurried gait of a cow. The door was opened by a butler whose face resembled a polished walnut. "Sims, sir. Lady Margaret is in the small drawing-room." As he took Poirot's hat and gloves, Sims's eyes recorded detail the way a ledger keeps columns, politely, completely, with no commentary written in the margins. The small drawing-room offered a pleasing lesson in balance. 2 lamps, twin sofas, a scatter of books selected with intention rather than fashion. Lady Margaret Highfell rose from a window seat. She was tall, the sort of tall that makes a walking stick reassuring but not essential, and she had the upright neck of a woman who has hosted ambassadors and children with equal patience. "Monsieur Poirot." "How very kind." "Madam," he returned, bowing. "Kindness is when one gives up something one wants. I assure you, I desired very much to meet you." He accepted tea. The tray bore sandwiches in exact triangles. He noticed the faintest drift of lavender about her, a dignified scent, clean rather than sweet. "Highfell is, I fear, dull in November," Lady Margaret said, "but we are a small party, and my sister insists we make our own cheer." "Your sister?" "Mrs. Rowena Dale. Widowed. She lives with me now and conducts my life with admirable efficiency. There are a few others staying this week, old friends, or nearly so. We shall do our best to make you comfortable. I am already perfectly so." They observed the courtesies of strangers, then turned, as both had intended from the first moment, to the reason he had come. "It is an object," Lady Margaret said. "A dagger. Late 18th century. A family piece not by descent. My husband purchased it during a period of cultural enthusiasm. I should not like it to be spoken of as a bauble, though I suppose it is only that." A fingertip touched the rim of her teacup. "It has gone missing." "From where does it miss?" "From the library. The display cabinet there. It appears to have been taken without violence, no broken glass, no forced lock. I discovered the loss 2 evenings ago." "Ah." Poirot sipped. "And the guests, pardon, your dear friends." She understood the delicacy. "Sims has told them only that the library is closed for reorganization. I hope to avoid an atmosphere of suspicion." She paused. "I failed, I think. Suspicion is like fog. Even the best shutters cannot quite keep it out." Poirot inclined his head. "You have done what you could." "And your party?" Sir Giles Pembury, retired naval officer, louder than he knows, kinder than he admits. Professor Alfred Kittredge, who advises museums, very clever, a little nervous. Philip Trent, an art dealer, in the more respectable sense, I am assured. And Miss Clara Whitford, the daughter of an old friend. Her circumstances are constrained. Lady Margaret's eyes softened. And of course my sister. Merci. It is a helpful list. Those who are poor, those who are proud, those who are learned, each has his motive, none has the right. A bell rang distantly. Sims returned, as if conjured by sound. "Shall I show Monsieur Poirot to his room?" "Please," said Lady Margaret. "Dinner at 7, monsieur." "I will introduce you then." On the landing, Poirot admired a watercolour of the house framed by summer. "You keep Highfell very English," he said. "Lady Margaret finds that satisfactory, sir," Sims said, and permitted himself the smallest of smiles. Poirot unpacked swiftly. He straightened his tie, brushed a non-existent speck from his sleeve, and addressed his reflection, "We will be the guest who observes without seeming to look. We will be the cat who sleeps and keeps one eye." He waggled a finger at his moustaches. Both eyes. The drawing-room before dinner had that music of many small sounds, glasses meeting with restrained clinks, a poker settling in a grate, the rustle of a scarf. Lady Margaret presented him. Sir Giles Pembury had a chest like a barrel and a laugh stored in it. He wore his grey hair as if it were a naval decoration. "Ah, the detective." "No, no, consultant. We're all very safe, you know. Nothing to pinch but the family silver, what?" "Ha!" He shook Poirot's hand as though wringing it free of water. Professor Kittredge's spectacles were new and not yet quite trusted by his ears. He bowed over a glass of sherry and peered at Poirot as if considering a footnote. "I have read of your methods," he said, and then blushed at the boldness of having read at all. Philip Trent was younger than the others by a decade and had the alertness of a man trained to notice rarity. "Delighted," he said, and meant it. The eyes, however, flicked, mantel, cabinet, window latch, an art dealer's glance taking stock. Clara Whitford, slight and pale, held her hands together as though rehearsing an apology. A ribbon at her wrist, green silk, stole a quiet share of the firelight. "I have heard that you find truth in people's shoes," she said, and then seemed to regret speaking. "Occasionally in their shoes, mademoiselle," Poirot replied, "more often in their eyes." Mrs. Rowena Dale stood near the piano, a figure arranged with economy, pearls, a dark dress, a shawl of soft green. She did not hurry to greet him. When she did, she gave him a look that recognized the necessity of his presence and the inconvenience of it in equal measure. "Welcome to Highfell, Monsieur Poirot. My sister is always right in principle." I try to be right in practice. Dinner was well conducted without being stiff. Sims floated in and out, a priest in the Church of Appetite. Conversation settled on weather, then London, then a light skirmish about modern art conducted civilly by Trent and the Professor. Lady Margaret steered the talk as one might guide a boat away from shoals. Poirot tasted, observed, stored away. Two things impressed themselves upon him. First, more than one guest wore a trace of scent, discreet, not showy. Lavender clung to Lady Margaret like a signature, something darker, jasmine, perhaps, attended Mrs. Dale when she turned her head. Second, the eyes of the party visited the door to the library as though it were a portrait of someone recently dead. They did not look long, they looked often. Clara looked not at all, which was its own kind of looking. When the ladies withdrew, Sir Giles offered cigars and naval reminiscence. The thing about a locked door, he declared, is that it makes honest men curious and thieves professionals. He laughed at his own philosophy and puffed contentedly upon it. Locked doors are excellent servants, Poirot said, but very poor companions. They demand attention. Later, at Lady Margaret's suggestion, the party took coffee in the small drawing room. Rain tapped insistently at the windows. Mrs. Dale played a few bars on the piano, deft, unsentimental, and then closed the lid as if putting away emotion for the night. Clara excused herself early with the faint, quick smile of someone who believes her absence lightens the room. Professor Kittredge dropped a teaspoon and apologized to the floor. Philip Trent crouched to retrieve it before Sims could. In the small bustle, Poirot noticed a single thread of green silk upon the carpet, so fine it might have been mistaken for a beam of light had it not been so still. He bent, not quite, and considered it, then glanced up with an expression of mild interest at a painting on the wall. There were many threads in a house, some in cloth, some in talk. A man might lose a button and not notice for a week. A woman might lose a thread and feel suddenly incomplete. When the party retired, Lady Margaret detained Poirot only long enough to ask, with a composed voice that did not match her hand on the chair back, "You will look tomorrow?" "With your permission, at once," he said. A good night's sleep, she is built upon a good conscience. When the conscience is disturbed, one must first straighten the pillow. She smiled, as if humour were a rope thrown across a dark gap. "Sims will give you the keys after breakfast." "I do thank you for coming." Poirot bowed himself out. In his room he arranged his cufflinks in twin arcs and set his shoes side by side so precisely they seemed a pair of mirrored thoughts. He extinguished the lamp and sat for a moment in the hush that belongs to old houses. The rain had deepened. Somewhere below, a door settled in its frame with a sound like agreement. "Tomorrow," he told the darkness, "we will see the library. We will meet the cabinet. We will make the acquaintance of the absence." He slept at once, as neat in slumber as in life, while the November night pressed its cool hand against the windows and Highfell Court, containing its people and their worries, waited politely for morning. Chapter 2: The Locked Cabinet. The following morning broke reluctantly. Grey light slanted through a veil of mist, laying a pale film over the lawns and the clipped yew hedges. Poirot, who valued punctuality as one values an old friend, arrived in the breakfast room at precisely 8 o'clock. The room was scented faintly with coffee and toast. Lady Margaret sat at the head of the table, upright and composed, though her eyes betrayed that she had slept less than well. The others straggled in with varying degrees of cheer. Sir Giles Pembury boomed a good morning, as though addressing a parade ground. Professor Kittredge muttered something into his napkin. Clara Whitford, pale and deliberate in her movements, took a seat as far from Lady Margaret as the table allowed. Mrs. Dale entered last, shawl draped perfectly about her shoulders, and inclined her head at Poirot. "Sims," Lady Margaret said once the coffee had been poured, "please give Monsieur Poirot the keys." The butler produced a small leather pouch, from which he extracted a pair of ornate brass keys. The first, sir, for the library itself. The second, for the display cabinet. Poirot accepted them with care, as though they were rare coins. You are certain, madam, that these are the only copies? Quite certain, Lady Margaret replied. One pair in my keeping, one with Sims. No others exist. Poirot's eyebrows rose just slightly. It is good to know where one begins. The library lay along the east wing, its tall windows facing the garden where the mist still clung. The air inside was faintly chilled, with a scent of leather bindings and polished wood. The display cabinet stood against the far wall, a handsome piece in dark mahogany, its glass doors framed by delicate carving. Poirot crossed the room with deliberate slowness, his eyes registering the scene as a painter registers light, the slight drag marks in the carpet where the cabinet had been moved a fraction of an inch, the faintest scatter of dust motes suspended in the cold beam from the window, the shadow of an absent object upon the velvet-lined shelf. Voila, Poirot murmured, kneeling to examine the lock. No marks of violence. The mechanism, it is intact. One turns the key, one opens the door, and the dagger, she is gone. Lady Margaret came to stand beside him. The shelf held only that piece. I noticed its absence when I came to show it to Professor Kitteridge. Indeed. Poirot tilted his head. And, madam, when was the last time you saw it before it vanished? 2 weeks ago. I do not make a habit of visiting the cabinet daily. Poirot nodded and took a silk handkerchief from his pocket before touching the cabinet handle. Ah. A smudge, here, at the base. Not from a careless hand, no. This is pale dust, fine, perhaps from the gloves of someone who wished to avoid leaving fingerprints. Yet dust still leaves its own trace. Lady Margaret frowned. But surely, if gloves were worn, then it was a person who knows about fingerprints, Poirot finished. That knowledge is common enough now, but still, it narrows the field. As he opened the cabinet door, a glint caught his eye. On the inner hinge was caught a tiny thread of green silk. Poirot examined it without touching. A thread, and not from your own garments, madam. No, Lady Margaret said. I own nothing in that shade. Then we will remember this green, yes, it is important. Poirot took from his pocket a small envelope, into which he carefully coaxed the thread. One must keep the souvenirs of the crime, however small. They speak when the people will not. Poirot next paced the perimeter of the room. He stooped at the hearth, examined the ash, only wood, no scraps of paper or cloth. He studied the writing desk, finding the inkstand full and the blotter neatly aligned. At the windows, he paused. One of the lower panes bore the faint smudge of a palm, half wiped. Outside, the ground sloped away to a strip of lawn and a gravel path. Sims, Poirot called. The butler appeared at once. Monsieur, when did you last clean these windows? 2 days ago, sir. The lower panes were polished from the outside and within. Then this mark, she is more recent. Poirot stepped out into the garden. The grass here was flattened, and in the softer earth beneath the window he found a clear footprint, slightly blurred, but deep enough to reveal a ribbed sole. A few paces away, another print matched it. Bending, Poirot picked up a small object, a cigarette but damp from the mist. He held it up to the light. A Turkish blend. Not a common choice in these parts, perhaps. Sir Giles smokes them, Sims offered after a pause. Though he is not the only one who has done so here. Poirot nodded, his moustaches curling thoughtfully. You are discreet, Sims. I commend you. Inside again, Poirot inspected the cabinet shelves more closely. He measured the faint rectangular mark in the velvet where the dagger had lain. The impression suggested the dagger had been removed with some care, the velvet was not disturbed beyond the outline. He turned to Lady Margaret. Describe for me, if you please, the dagger. It is silver gilt, with a hilt inlaid with emeralds. The blade is short, curved. My husband claimed it was ceremonial, an officer's gift in India around 1790. An inscription in Persian runs along the blade. Professor Kittredge said he might be able to translate it. Did he? He had no chance before the theft. Poirot tapped a finger against his chin. And you, madam, have you spoken of this dagger's value? To my guests? Certainly not. Though Philip Trent would know such things by sight. ABN. This dagger, its value is in money, yes, but also in history. To some, the history may be the more dangerous part. When Poirot had finished with the cabinet, he asked to see Sims's key. The butler fetched it promptly from a locked drawer in his pantry. Poirot compared it to Lady Margaret's. Both were identical and in good condition. You keep yours here, Sims? Yes, sir. In the drawer. Locked at all times. Poirot gave the faintest shrug. Drawers, they can be unlocked. Returning to the breakfast room, Poirot found most of the guests gone about their morning amusements. Only Clara Whitford remained, bent over a letter she appeared in no hurry to finish. A beautiful day for writing, mademoiselle? Poirot asked lightly. Clara started, folding the paper quickly. It is for my mother. Ah, the mothers, they appreciate the letters, especially when they contain no bad news. Poirot's gaze lingered a moment on the ribbon at her wrist, green silk, a near match to the thread he had found. But he said nothing of it then. In the hall, Mrs. Dale crossed his path. Monsieur Poirot, I trust you are making progress. He smiled. Progress, madam, is sometimes measured not by what we find, but by knowing where not to look. Her expression was unreadable. Then I hope you will soon know exactly where to look. By late morning, Poirot had formed the beginning of a pattern. There was the green thread, the glove smudge on the cabinet, the footprint outside the window, and the cigarette butt. All small pieces, yet already he sensed the theft was no mere snatch and grab. Someone had knowledge of the object, of the house, of the keys. And someone had taken care to remove the dagger without leaving overt disturbance, yet not so much care as to leave no trace at all. He stood once more in the library, hands behind his back, eyes half closed. The cabinet, he said softly, is like the stage after the actors have gone. The props remain, the floorboards are marked, the air still carries the perfume. The question is, what play was performed here, and who took the dagger as their final bow? The mist outside began to lift, but inside Highfell Court the air seemed no clearer. Poirot locked the cabinet, returned the key to Lady Margaret, and promised himself a closer study of each guest, especially the one who had worn green silk. Chapter 3, The Gathering Storm. By 11 the mist had thinned into threads, tugged apart by a slow wind that set the ewes whispering. Highfell Court presented a face of ancestral calm, but within, nerves fluttered like curtains at a window left ajar. Poirot, who enjoyed a morning routine as much as any man with tidy shoes, dedicated his third cup of coffee to a reconnaissance of the household. He began in the breakfast room, where the remains of company lingered like the last phrases of a polite argument. Sir Giles Pembury stood square before the sideboard, contemplating kidneys as though assessing an enemy position. "Ha," he said, noticing Poirot. "Thought I'd chase the damp out with something that bites back. Beastly weather." "It improves," Poirot observed. "The sun, she is practicing." "Needs drill," Sir Giles returned, but his usual boom had dropped a note. He buttered toast with the care of a man diffusing a mine. "I say, Lady Margaret told us the library is in disorder." "Papers everywhere," she said. "Can't have chaos in a house like this, eh?" "Order is a comfort," Poirot agreed mildly. "Especially when other comforts fail." Sir Giles blinked, then laughed too loudly and accused the marmalade of treachery. Yet he ate little and left quickly, offering an excuse about walking the perimeter, as if the topiary concealed hostile forces. Clara Whitford entered as he departed. She moved with the caution of someone who expects furniture to shift underfoot. "Good morning," she said, her voice perfectly polite and perfectly absent. She selected tea without meeting Lady Margaret's eye, though Lady Margaret had not come in. The green ribbon at Clara's wrist lay quiet against her cuff, a small river of colour. Chapter 3: The Gathering Storm. By 11 the mist had thinned into threads, tugged apart by a slow wind that set the yews whispering. Highfell Court presented a face of ancestral calm, but within, nerves fluttered like curtains at a window left ajar. Poirot, who enjoyed a morning routine as much as any man with tidy shoes, dedicated his third cup of coffee to a reconnaissance of the household. He began in the breakfast room, where the remains of company lingered like the last phrases of a polite argument. Sir Giles Pembury stood square before the sideboard, contemplating kidneys as though assessing an enemy position. "Ha," he said, noticing Poirot. "Thought I'd chase the damp out with something that bites back. Beastly weather." "It improves," Poirot observed. "The sun, she is practicing." "Needs drill," Sir Giles returned, but his usual boom had dropped a note. He buttered toast with the care of a man diffusing a mine. "I say, Lady Margaret told us the library is in disorder." "Papers everywhere," she said. "Can't have chaos in a house like this, eh?" "Order is a comfort," Poirot agreed mildly. "Especially when other comforts fail." Sir Giles blinked, then laughed too loudly and accused the marmalade of treachery. Yet he ate little and left quickly, offering an excuse about walking the perimeter, as if the topiary concealed hostile forces. Clara Whitford entered as he departed. She moved with the caution of someone who expects furniture to shift underfoot. "Good morning," she said, her voice perfectly polite and perfectly absent. She selected tea without meeting Lady Margaret's eye, though Lady Margaret had not come in. The green ribbon at Clara's wrist lay quiet against her cuff, a small river of colour. "You have written your letter?" Poirot asked, as if resuming an earlier conversation. "Yes," Clara said. She folded her hands and unfolded them again. "I shall post it on the road." She glanced towards the garden through the long window, then away. "If it is permitted." In houses like these, mademoiselle, everything is permitted, in theory. In practice, one asks Sims. He smiled to dispel the edge, but her answering smile was a sketch that did not become a picture. Professor Kittredge appeared next, fussing with his spectacles, which were determined to escape the indignity of his nose. "I slept abominably," he announced to the room at large. "Silly, really. I don't believe I have ever lost sleep over a dagger before." "Then you do not collect them," Poirot said. "Good heavens, no. Far too wicked-looking. I like coins. Coins don't pretend to be anything other than money." He blushed at himself. "That is to say, history. They are history, too." Poirot noted the man's hands, clever, pale, with an intention to tremble that he stifled by holding his cup with both. "And yet the dagger, it interested you for its inscription." The professor blinked. "Oh. Yes. A curiosity. One always wants to know what a thing says about itself. The voice of the object, so to speak. But I should never," he stopped, conscious at last of the path his words had taken, and peered into his tea as though it contained a footnote correcting him. "I assure you, Monsieur Poirot, I am a timid thief." "The timid ones do not steal," Poirot said. "But they sometimes know who does." Before the professor could decide whether this was comfort or accusation, Mrs. Rowena Dale glided in. She touched the professor's sleeve with the exactness of a metronome. "Alfred, you will catch chill standing in a draught." Then, to Poirot, our house exerts itself to be charming and succeeds only in exposing every creak. You are walking, monsieur? The lawns are less treacherous than the gravel. Then I will walk the lawns, Poirot said. He bowed. Madam. In the hall he passed Sims, who bore a salver with 2 letters, Clara's among them, the handwriting delicate but resolute. The butler's face, as always, gave nothing away, but his eyes registered the world like a camera obscura, reversed, precise, and private. Outside, the wind carried that clean smell peculiar to English damp, like linen rinsed and hung in a stone-walled yard. Poirot stepped down onto the lawn and allowed his feet to point themselves toward the east wing. The library windows, tall as a man and twice as severe, looked out upon a strip of grass and a path dressed in gravel the size and color of old coins. The lower right pane of the central window still showed, to the eye that knew where to look, the ghost of a partial handprint, wiped quick, not polished. In the soft earth between the lawn and the path, the footprints were as he had left them, a pair pressed deep enough to confess pattern. Ribbed soles, the kind found on modern shoes made for country walking rather than town display. The distance between the prints suggested a stride neither long nor heavy. He crouched and measured with thumb and forefinger. A man of medium height, or a woman used to walking. Not Sir Giles, his stride would chew more ground. Not Lady Margaret, she would not tramp here at all. Clara? Perhaps, though the neatness of her person suggested shoes more elegant than practical. Mrs. Dale? She wore heels yesterday, but heels can be changed like a mind. A scrap of white near the path winked at him. He pinched it delicately from the damp, the cigarette, but he had noticed, Turkish blend, the brown paper dark with rain. Its end was crushed without flourish. A smoker's habit can be as individual as a signature, the over-thorough twist, the casual pinch, the conscientious snuff. This one had been flattened by a shoe rather than fingers, leaving a small tear in the paper. He placed it in an envelope with the green thread. The envelope acknowledged its new companion with a whisper. The gardener found him thus employed and tipped his cap as men do when surprised by civilization at work on their soil. "Morning, sir." "Good morning," Poirot returned. "You tend this path?" "That I do." "Rake it of an evening, after the last of M's had their smoke." He looked at the butt in Poirot's hand. "Those nasty ones, Turkish. Sir Giles fancies them. Bit fierce for me." "And last evening?" Poirot asked. "Did you rake then?" "No, sir." Rain said no. "It'll do half the work if you let it." He glanced at the footprints. "Them weren't there this morning when I come, though. Must have been after I looked in." He did not say when that was. Poirot did not ask. Servants notice everything and declare little, one must leave them dignity in their discretion. When Poirot returned to the house, he found Sir Giles in the billiard room, making a vigorous attempt upon a simple cannon and failing it with panache. "Your blend," Poirot said, placing the envelope on the edge of the table without opening it. Sir Giles glanced, then away. "Dash it, man, if Highfell starts charging duty on each puff, I shall emigrate. Half the county smokes what I smoke. Half the county does not smoke it under Lady Margaret's library window." The naval officer bristled and then deflated, as if a boatswain's whistle had recalled him to order. "I wonder when the weather's foul. Habit of the sea, walk a deck, even if the deck is lawn. If I flicked a cigarette where I shouldn't, consider the county informed of my remorse." He chalked his cue with elaborate innocence. "You can't think I'm prizing windows like a cat burglar." "I think," Poirot said, "that walking is healthy." Sir Giles missed another easy shot and swore at the universe in a way sailors do that sounds learned rather than vulgar. In the morning room, the professor stood at the window turning a page of the newspaper without reading it. "You have seen the cabinet?" he asked as if asking the weather. I have seen what the cabinet wished to tell me. Poirot studied the man's posture, a scholar leaning away from the world's brute facts. And you, Professor, did the inscription on the dagger concern names? Names. The spectacles tilted. Possibly. Dates and honorifics, one expects. I cannot say more until I see it. An innocent slip, that until. He colored. I mean, saw it. Saw. Poirot let the error rest. Names have a way of bringing the past to the present with inconvenient speed. The professor's mouth attempted a smile and retired from the effort. By luncheon, the sky had brightened into a pale promise. Lady Margaret presided with steadiness. Mrs. Dale was precise in her attentions, a napkin rescued, a water glass refreshed, as if hosting were a moral duty. Clara kept close to silence. Philip Trent, coming in late with a faint sheen of weather on his hair, pitched his conversation carefully between the ladies and the professor. Magnificent park, he said. The cedars have that admirable disdain for fashion. His eye met Poirot's and flicked away, the quick glance of a man who collects more than pictures. I should love to catalogue your husband's acquisitions, Lady Margaret, if ever you wish. Merely for your records. Philip, Mrs. Dale said, without looking at him, you are a guest, not an auctioneer. Trent's smile did not quite reach his eyes. Knowledge is not always commercial, Mrs. Dale. Nor is ignorance always innocent, she returned, cool as a folded letter. Poirot watched the small collision and stored it among his impressions. Lunch concluded without further frictions, but the air had acquired a charge. He had the sense of a theatre where the lighting man has tested his lamps and found one prone to sputter. In the corridor afterwards, he paused by a lacquer cabinet that had survived 2 centuries without learning to be modest. Clara appeared, as if drawn by the quiet. I feel as if I am walking on a frozen pond, she said suddenly. Everyone looks down to see how thin it is. Do you skate, mademoiselle? I pretend to. She glanced at her wrist and seemed to remember the ribbon. Her fingers tucked it inside her cuff with a motion too swift to be considered. Have you found anything? Many things, Poirot said. None yet that other thing. But do not be anxious, anxiety makes the ice thinner. Clara's eyes filled without spilling. Anxiety is like a lesson one must sit through. It drones on whether one listens or not. Then we will ring the bell for the end of class, he said gravely, and she gave him, for the first time, a smile with a future in it. Near 3 o'clock, as the first patterings of new rain approached across the fields like a regiment of small drums, Poirot walked alone through the west corridor. Voices murmured behind a half-closed door, women's voices, low and hurried. He did not eavesdrop, he simply allowed sound to arrive at him as air does. Say nothing unless asked directly, Mrs. Dale's voice advised, crisp with instruction. A silence, then Clara's softer tone, but if I am asked. Then you answer only the question. The door clicked fully shut, square and without apology. Poirot stood very still, considering. Advice can be an act of care or an act of strategy. Often it is both. By late afternoon the wind freshened. The clouds massed like jurors about to file in. Highfell's rooms grew a shade darker, and with the darkness came that peculiar alertness common to houses under strain, a candlestick too bright on a mantel, a clock too eager with its quarter hour, a footstep rehearsed. Poirot, content, as a cat is content when the house fills with interesting rustlings, reviewed his morning. He had a footprint that argued for practicality over elegance. He had a cigarette that spoke with a foreign accent. He had a green thread that would not be quiet. He had, too, a small but persistent sense that the thing stolen was not only valuable but dangerous in its meaning. Objects that merely glitter are stolen by the greedy, objects that whisper are stolen by the afraid. And there remained the human arrangements, Sir Giles loud and unsatisfied, the Professor honest enough to betray himself, Trent agile with his attention, Clara folded in upon some private bruise, Mrs. Dale efficient, economical, and, when she thought the door closed, directive. The rain arrived with conviction. Poirot returned to his room and set the envelopes on the writing table. He aligned them precisely, as if making a diagram of a conversation yet to be held. Outside, the gutters spoke quietly of perseverance. Chapter 4: A Disturbing Discovery. The rain had not stopped all night. It came down with the steady determination of a solicitor drafting a will, and by morning the gravel paths of Highfell Court wore puddles like misplaced mirrors. Poirot, who preferred his environment dry and his mysteries contained, found the day's dampness ill-suited to his moustaches. He was seated in the small drawing-room, reviewing the previous day's observations in a neat column of notes, when Sims appeared. The butler's usual calm had thinned into a taut thread. "If you would come at once, sir," he said. "It's Mr. Trent. There's been an incident." The study was a long, narrow room lined with shelves that held fewer books than one might expect, and more framed photographs than necessary. Philip Trent was seated in a leather armchair, pale beneath his usual polished veneer. A dark stain marked the right side of his temple, where a trickle of blood had already dried. Lady Margaret hovered beside him, her hand on the back of the chair as if to hold him in the present moment. Mrs. Dale stood a pace away, arms folded tightly, her shawl today was dove grey. Trent looked up at Poirot and managed a wry half-smile. "Not the sort of excitement I came for." "ABN," Poirot said, stepping closer. "Tell me, if you please, exactly what happened." "I'd come in to fetch a book I left here last night. The place was empty. I was halfway across the room when..." He hesitated, frowning as if reaching for a misplaced word. "When something struck me from behind. Not hard enough to knock me out, but enough to sit me down sharp." "You saw nothing?" "Nothing," Trent said. "And when I turned, the room was just as you see it now." Poirot's gaze swept the room. The rain-dimmed light showed a few items out of place. A whiskey glass, half empty, on the desk near a blotter. A playing card, the Queen of Spades, peeking out from beneath a leather-bound book. The faint trace of perfume, not Lady Margaret's lavender, but something warmer, heavier, jasmine with a touch of musk. Poirot addressed Sims. "Who found him?" "I did, sir. I was passing when I heard the chair scrape." Mr. Trent called out. "I fetched Lady Margaret at once." "Did you see anyone leave?" "No, sir. But the hall door was ajar." Poirot looked at Trent. "Did you notice if anything was taken?" Trent shook his head. "No. My watch is still on me, my wallet too. There's nothing in here worth the trouble, unless someone has developed a taste for paperweights." Poirot picked up the whiskey glass by its rim and inspected the contents. The faint scent suggested it had been poured some time earlier, perhaps last night. He set it back exactly where he had found it. The playing card drew his attention next. Sliding it free, he examined both sides. "Do you play cards here, Monsieur Trent?" Trent's mouth curved faintly. "I play them when invited, which isn't often here." "That's not mine." Poirot slipped the card into his pocket. "A card, she is sometimes only a card. And sometimes she is a signal." Lady Margaret's voice cut in, quiet but firm. "This cannot go on. First the dagger, now this. I invited my friends to a civilized gathering, not a..." She stopped herself short. "Monsieur Poirot, what do you make of it?" "That someone wishes to unsettle us, madam. And they succeed. But we must not be hurried. Haste, she is the enemy of the truth." Mrs. Dale spoke for the first time. "Or perhaps this is nothing more than a drunken misstep." Mr. Trent does enjoy a drink." Trent's eyes flashed, though his tone remained even. "If I fall over my own feet, Mrs. Dale, I generally avoid doing it in the company of a blow to the head." Her lips pressed into a thin smile. "Forgive me. I meant only that accidents do happen." Poirot filed the exchange away in that careful mental cabinet where the smallest remarks are often the most revealing. When Trent was escorted upstairs to rest, Poirot remained in the study. He measured the distances, the chair to the door, the desk to the shelves. Near the window, the rug was slightly rucked, as if someone had pivoted in haste. He knelt to smooth it and found, lodged between the rug and the skirting board, a small pearl-headed pin. A lady's, perhaps. Or a man's, if that man were in the habit of mending fine gloves. Slipping it into an envelope, Poirot glanced once more at the faint haze of perfume in the air. Such scents did not linger without recent application. Whoever had struck Trent had been here only moments before Sims arrived. In the corridor, Poirot encountered Sir Giles Pembury, pipe in hand. "I hear Trent's taken a knock," Sir Giles said, as if discussing the weather. "Terrible thing. Did the fellow see his assailant?" "No." "And you, Sir Giles, where were you?" "Billiard room, mostly. I don't suppose anyone noticed me there, but I wasn't skulking about in the study, if that's your drift." He tapped his pipe against his palm. "This house is getting twitchy, Poirot. People seeing ghosts in their teacups. If the dagger's gone, it's gone. Let the insurance chap sort it." Poirot smiled without warmth. Alas, the insurance chaps, they do not solve mysteries. They only close accounts. The rest of the morning passed under a strain that was impossible to ignore. Clara Whitford avoided both Trent and Mrs. Dale, taking her sketchbook to the conservatory. Professor Kittredge shut himself in the library, locked, of course, against visitors, claiming he needed to work on a lecture. Poirot took the opportunity to stroll through the hallways, letting his eyes and ears do their quiet work. In the anteroom leading to the terrace, he found another cigarette but Turkish blend, this one dry, suggesting it had been discarded before the rain began in earnest. A curious thing, given the weather the previous evening. At luncheon, Trent appeared, his head neatly bandaged, his manner steady but subdued. He said little, eating slowly. The conversation, such as it was, skirted the incident. Poirot observed small details, Clara's gaze flicking toward Trent and away again, Mrs. Dale buttering her roll with precise, unhurried strokes, Sir Giles looking everywhere but at the bandage. After the meal, Lady Margaret requested that everyone remain indoors for the afternoon. The weather, she said, was too inclement for walking. No one objected, though the agreement had the air of a truce rather than consent. By mid-afternoon, Poirot's mind was arranging the pieces, the missing dagger, the green silk thread, the footprint and cigarette outside the library, and now this, an attack with no apparent purpose. But was it without purpose, or merely without an obvious one? He sat in the drawing-room, watching the rain blur the view of the garden. A figure passed in the corridor, Mrs. Dale, moving quickly, her grey shawl drawn close. A moment later, a second figure, Clara, followed at a distance, clutching her sketchbook. Poirot rose and stepped to the doorway, but by then both had vanished down the far hall. At 7, the household gathered for dinner. The fire crackled, but the warmth was only in the hearth, not in the air between the guests. Trent, though quieter than usual, lifted his glass. To better fortunes. Sir Giles barked something like agreement. Mrs. Dale sipped her wine without comment. Clara's fork clinked against her plate. The professor murmured to Lady Margaret about the weather's effect on his sinuses. Poirot, meanwhile, was thinking not about the weather but about the Queen of Spades in his pocket, and the curious fact that in some circles, the card had a meaning far darker than any game of whist. When the meal ended and the guests retired to their rooms, Poirot remained in the dining room for a final look. On the sideboard, a vase of roses caught his eye. One bloom was slightly crushed at the stem, as if brushed by a passing sleeve. Bending closer, he detected again the same warm, jasmine-laced perfume he had found in the study. He straightened, his eyes brightening. Somewhere in Highfell Court was a link between the missing dagger and the attack on Philip Trent. And now, he thought, he had begun to smell it. Chapter 5: Secrets in the Dark. By the next morning, the atmosphere in Highfell Court had settled into a brittle politeness. Every conversation seemed shorter than it ought to be, as if people feared that more words might betray them. Poirot, who believed that silence often spoke more fluently than speech, decided it was the perfect moment to conduct his interviews. He began with Sir Giles Pembury, catching him alone in the billiard room, where the green baize and gleaming cues seemed more at ease than the man himself. Sir Giles Pembury. Naval discipline, Monsieur Poirot, Sir Giles said, chalking his cue with more force than necessary, teaches you to get on with the thing in front of you. This dagger business, drag it out and it'll poison the lot of us. Yet you would prefer it to be resolved. I'd prefer it forgotten. Sir Giles lined up a shot and missed it so widely that even the cue ball looked offended. If it turns up, good. If it doesn't, well, there are worse crimes. Crimes such as striking a man in the study. Poirot asked lightly. Sir Giles froze mid-chalk, then laughed in a manner meant to be careless. I've never taken a swing at Trent. Not my style. Poirot noted the quickness of the denial. And the dagger, it has a history connected to India, does it not? The cue ball rolled into a pocket by accident. Bertram Highfell served under a man I knew slightly. Rumours. Mutiny. Best left in the past. Sometimes, Poirot said, the past, she does not agree to stay there. Sir Giles said nothing, but his jaw tightened. Clara Whitford. Poirot found Clara in the conservatory, sketchbook open on her lap. She was drawing the delicate front of a fern, though her hand moved without real focus. Mademoiselle, you are very quiet these days. Clara's pencil hesitated. I prefer to listen. It feels safer. Safer than speaking. She glanced up, then down again. Sometimes words come back to you in ways you didn't intend. And here, well, everyone seems to be watching everyone else. Poirot studied her ribbon, green silk, the very shade of the thread from the cabinet. Your wrist decoration, it is charming. A gift? My mother's, Clara said quickly, tucking it beneath her sleeve. It's old. You wore it the evening before the dagger was discovered missing. Yes. I wear it often. Poirot allowed the subject to rest. And Monsieur Trent, do you know him well? Only as an acquaintance. He talks about art as if it's something alive. I like that. She paused. I don't like seeing him hurt. The statement seemed genuine, but Poirot noted that it was expressed in the abstract, not as a direct defense. Professor Alfred Kittredge. The professor was in the morning room, poring over a reference book whose pages were dotted with neat, inoffensive notes. He looked up nervously as Poirot entered. Monsieur Poirot, I trust you are making progress. I make progress always, Professor, though the road is sometimes curved. Poirot settled opposite him. The dagger, it interested you for its inscription. Yes, yes. Such things can shed light on forgotten events. It might have named the owner, perhaps the occasion of its presentation. For an historian, that is a jewel. Or for someone in the past, it might be dangerous. Kittredge shifted in his chair. History is full of inconvenient truths. But our duty is to record them, not conceal them. And yet, Poirot said softly, to protect a name, one might conceal. The professor's hands fluttered like startled birds. That is not my way. But he could not hold Poirot's gaze for long. Mrs. Rowena Dale. Mrs. Dale was in the library, sorting a small stack of correspondence. Her movements were precise, efficient. "Monsieur Poirot," she said without looking up, "I suppose you wish to question me next." "If you would be so kind, madam. I will save you trouble. I did not steal the dagger, nor did I attack Philip Trent." She laid down her pen with a small click. "My concern is for my sister's peace. This intrusion is not to her benefit. And yet you would defend her, even if the truth were painful." "I would defend her against pain that serves no purpose." Mrs. Dale finally met his eyes. "Not all truths are useful, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot inclined his head. "That is so. But they are always there, whether useful or not." Her mouth curved in something that might have been amusement, or challenge. "Philip Trent." Trent received Poirot in his bedroom, propped against pillows, the bandage still neat around his head. "I suppose you're wondering who wanted to hit me," Trent said. "Join the club. You have no enemies in this house. Not that I know of. But in my trade, one makes enemies without trying. Dealers one has outbid, collectors one has outmaneuvered." He smiled faintly. "It's not a business for the thin-skinned." "And the dagger, did you see it closely before it vanished?" "Close enough to admire the workmanship. Close enough to know that selling it would require a buyer with more discretion than taste." "Then you think it was taken to be hidden, not sold?" Trent's eyes narrowed. "Maybe. There are things in this world people would rather bury than display." With the formal interviews complete, Poirot took himself to the drawing room. He had gathered threads, green silk, Turkish cigarettes, a pearl-headed pin, the scent of jasmine, but they had not yet woven themselves into a clear pattern. Still, certain impressions had settled in his mind. Sir Giles feared the past more than the present. Clara carried an anxiety she could not name aloud. The professor's curiosity might outweigh his discretion. Mrs. Dale valued protection over disclosure. Trent suspected the motive lay in concealment, not profit. That evening, the weather turned restless again, rain hissing against the windows in sharp bursts. The household assembled for coffee in the drawing room. Conversation was thin, the silences growing longer. Poirot sat apart, polishing his moustaches, appearing lost in private reflection. In truth, he was listening to the rhythm of voices, to the subtle changes in tone when certain names were spoken, to the small betrayals of posture and glance. When Mrs. Dale left the room briefly, Clara's eyes followed her until she was gone. Trent noticed, his gaze sharpening for a moment before returning to his cup. Sir Giles filled the gap with a naval story that began in good humor and ended with a cough. The professor excused himself early, citing fatigue. Poirot noted the order in which people left, the pauses between their departures, the brief exchanges in the doorway. All part of the choreography of a household in unease. Later, as Poirot prepared for bed, he considered the phrase Mrs. Dale had used, "Not all truths are useful." To whom would the truth about the dagger be harmful? And would that same person, faced with the risk of exposure, go so far as to strike down a man in a quiet study? He extinguished the lamp and lay still, letting the pattern take shape in the dark. Somewhere in the house, a floorboard creaked, a small sound, but in the night it seemed loud. Poirot smiled faintly. "Patience," he murmured. "The darkness, she hides secrets. But also, she makes the guilty step carefully, and that is when they stumble." Chapter 6: Red Herrings and Tensions. The morning brought a gusty wind that swept last night's rain into the hedges and rattled the windows in their frames. Poirot, taking breakfast later than usual, found the dining room half empty. Sir Giles was already gone, and Trent had not yet appeared. Lady Margaret presided at the table with the fortitude of a ship's captain in heavy seas, while Clara toyed with her toast and Mrs. Dale spread marmalade with precise economy. It was Sims who brought the news, stepping into the room with the deliberate gravity of a man delivering an unpleasant telegram. "Lady," he said, "I have something you should see. It concerns the missing object." Lady Margaret's cup halted midway to her lips. "The dagger?" "Yes, lady." His eyes flicked to Poirot. "Perhaps Monsieur would wish to accompany us." The butler led them through the west wing to a small corridor that served the guest bedrooms. He stopped outside the third door on the right, Clara's room. It was during routine cleaning, Sims explained, producing a wrapped bundle from under his arm. One of the maids found this beneath a loose floorboard at the far end of the passage. The board was replaced, but the space beneath contained this. He unwrapped the bundle to reveal the dagger, silver-gilt, its hilt inlaid with small emeralds, the blade's curve still gleaming despite the tarnish at the base. It was wrapped in a length of green silk, the color rich and unmistakable. Clara gasped. "That's my scarf." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. "Indeed." She nodded, hands tightening in her lap. "I've been looking for it for days. I thought I'd left it in London." Mrs. Dale spoke before anyone else could. "Then perhaps you mislaid it here, Clara. It would be an unfortunate coincidence, but coincidences do happen." Lady Margaret's voice was cool. "And the dagger has been hidden in the same cloth. That stretches coincidence to breaking point." Clara's face drained of color. "I didn't do this. I would never." Poirot stepped forward, taking the dagger carefully in his gloved hands. He examined the silk, creases, faint marks of dust, and the weapon itself. "There is no damage to the dagger," he observed. "And no dust on the blade, despite being under the floorboard. This tells us something. It tells us that Clara is being framed." Trent's voice came from the doorway. He had arrived silently. His gaze swept the group, landing briefly on Mrs. Dale. Only a fool would hide it so close to herself. Poirot replaced the dagger in its wrapping and returned it to Sims. "We will not decide guilt by geography. Madam, lock this in a safe place for now. No more hiding beneath the floorboards." When the group dispersed, Poirot lingered in the corridor. The floorboard where the dagger had been found was, indeed, loose at one end. It required no tool to lift it, only a discreet nudge from a shoe. The space beneath was shallow, barely deep enough for the dagger's length. He knelt, peering into the dim gap. The dust was disturbed in a neat oval, nothing else stored there, no other objects. Whoever placed the dagger had done so recently, the impression was crisp, not softened by time. Downstairs, in the morning room, Poirot found Sir Giles reading a newspaper with exaggerated interest. "You have heard?" Poirot asked. Sir Giles folded the paper in half, a crackle like dry twigs. "Found in the girls' corridor, eh? Bad luck for her? Or bad judgment? You think she is guilty? I think she's young, broke, and living in a house full of temptation." Sir Giles reached for his pipe. "Still, seems a bit too obvious. Even a clumsy thief wouldn't tuck the goods under her own nose." Poirot smiled faintly. "I agree. Obviousness, she is rarely genuine." In the drawing room, the professor hovered near the fireplace, warming his hands as though from a long frost. "This changes everything," he said when Poirot joined him. "If the dagger's recovered, surely the business is finished." "Not quite," Poirot said. "Finding the object does not always mean finding the truth. But surely Lady Margaret can now simply put it away." Poirot studied him. "Would that suit you, Professor?" Kitteridge's fingers twitched. I suppose it might spare embarrassment if certain inscriptions were to prove sensitive." Poirot nodded slowly. Yes. But it would not spare us from the person who thought to hide it. By luncheon, Clara's distress had become the unspoken center of the table. She sat pale and rigid, answering questions in the fewest words possible. Mrs. Dale maintained her usual composure, though Poirot noticed the occasional glance in her niece's direction, assessing, not sympathetic. Trent attempted light conversation, but his humor fell into the quiet like stones into a pond, raising only brief ripples. Sir Giles kept to his food. The professor applied himself to the bread as if translating its texture. The afternoon passed in a strained hush. Poirot took the opportunity to revisit the study where Trent had been attacked. The faint perfume still lingered, jasmine, warm and unmistakable. On the desk lay the playing card he had pocketed before, now, in its place, was a faint outline in dust where it had rested. He turned toward the window. Rain-streaked glass blurred the view of the garden, but he could see the path where he'd found the cigarette but days earlier. His mind began assembling a timeline: the theft, the dagger's disappearance, Trent's attack, and now the dagger's reappearance in a place too convenient to be true. Near dusk, Poirot encountered Clara in the conservatory. She was staring at the rain pooling on the glass roof. "I suppose you think I'm guilty," she said, without turning. "I think," Poirot replied, "that you are frightened." Guilt and fear, they can look alike to the untrained eye. She faced him then, and for the first time he saw not anxiety but anger. "Someone wants me to take the blame." "Why?" "I've done nothing." Poirot considered her carefully. "The why, mademoiselle, is as important as the who. But the who here he is never far from the why." That evening, Lady Margaret announced she had placed the dagger in a locked cabinet in her bedroom. "It will stay there until the police come tomorrow," she said. Poirot noted the reactions. Sir Giles frowned, perhaps at the mention of police. The professor dropped his spoon, recovered it, and made a show of ignoring the moment. Clara's shoulders eased fractionally. Mrs. Dale sipped her tea without change of expression. Trent's gaze shifted, calculating. Later, Poirot stood alone in the dim hall outside Lady Margaret's room, listening to the sounds of the house settling. A door closed somewhere, footsteps moved in measured rhythm. He allowed himself a thin smile. The dagger had been found, yes, but far too early, far too neatly. Someone had hoped to conclude the matter without further probing, to seal away both object and inquiry. But the matter was far from over. As Poirot returned to his own room, he thought of the green silk, the cigarette, the perfume, and now the dagger's theatrical reappearance. A red herring, yes, but one that swam close to the truth. "Ah," he murmured to the little grey cells, "we are in the second act. The curtain will not fall so easily." Chapter 7: The Final Performance. The wind had died by morning, but Highfell Court still felt as though a storm hung in its rafters. Poirot, rising early, ordered a modest breakfast in his room. He needed time to think, without the interruptions of dining-room conversation and the constant skirmishes of glances between guests. The dagger's reappearance was the kind of trick designed to end a story prematurely. He had no intention of letting the curtain drop before the final act. By mid-morning, Poirot had requested that all guests gather in the drawing-room after dinner. Lady Margaret, though clearly puzzled, agreed without protest. The invitation was issued with the politeness of a dinner menu, short, plain, and impossible to refuse. The day passed in a taut quiet. Clara remained mostly in her room, Sir Giles paced the terrace like a man waiting for orders, Mrs. Dale managed the household with her usual clipped efficiency, the professor fussed over his papers, and Trent, bandaged but brisk, was seen in the library, leaning on the shelves as though testing their weight. Poirot spent the hours not in interrogation but in subtle observation, pausing in corridors, noting who spoke to whom, how doors were opened and closed, who lingered by the east wing windows. By the time evening approached, his mind had arranged the fragments into a near-complete pattern. The drawing room that night was warm with lamplight and the low crackle of the fire. Chairs had been drawn into a loose semicircle. The air carried a faint trace of Lady Margaret's lavender, overlaid with the sharper scent of tension. Poirot stood at the hearth, hands clasped neatly before him. His tone was courteous, his manner calm, but there was a quiet authority in the way he let his gaze rest on each face in turn. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "you have been patient while I have examined the theft of the dagger and the unfortunate attack upon Monsieur Trent. Tonight, I will present to you the truth of these matters. It is, how do you say, the moment of the unmasking." Sir Giles shifted in his chair. "You mean you found the culprit?" "I mean," Poirot said gently, "that I know the culprit, the method, and the motive. But before we arrive at the end, we must take the proper journey." He turned slightly, addressing them as though telling a story. "First, the theft. The cabinet was opened without force, using one of two keys. Lady Margaret's key was secure, Sims's also, in his locked drawer. The thief either took one key briefly or already had access to it. In the cabinet's hinge, I found a green silk thread. Mademoiselle Clara's ribbon is of that exact shade. This was meant to lead us to her. But the ribbon had no loose ends when I first saw it. The thread was a plant, placed there when the dagger was stolen, not torn in the act of theft. Clever, yes, but too tidy." Clara looked down at her hands, then back at Poirot, eyes wide. "Next, the garden path," Poirot continued. "Footprints outside the library window, ribbed soles, moderate stride, not Sir Giles's heavy step. A Turkish cigarette but beside them. Sir Giles smokes them, but so, on occasion, has another in this house, one who believed that pointing suspicion towards the loudest person would work in their favour." Sir Giles gave a short bark of laughter. "Well, that's gratitude for you." Poirot inclined his head politely, then went on. "Then we have the attack on Monsieur Trent. A sudden blow in the study, no theft, only the disturbance of certain objects, a whiskey glass, a playing card, and the faint scent of jasmine. That perfume belongs not to Lady Margaret, whose lavender is constant, but to Mrs. Dale." Mrs. Dale's brow arched. "Are you accusing me of assault, Monsieur Poirot?" "I am noting that your perfume was in the air of that room moments after the attack. That, madam, is not the same as guilt, but it is presence." Trent's eyes narrowed slightly, as though a thought had just occurred to him. Poirot let the fire pop before continuing. Then came the most dramatic act, the reappearance of the dagger beneath a floorboard near Clara's room, wrapped in her own green silk scarf. A perfect package of guilt, too perfect. The dust beneath that board was freshly disturbed, the scarf had no signs of long concealment, the blade was clean. It was not hidden there for days, but placed very recently, likely while most of the house was elsewhere. The intention was to bring the matter to an untidy but convenient close. The professor shifted in his seat. "And yet you kept the police from taking it away immediately." "Why?" "Because," Poirot said, "I wished to see what the person who hid it would do next. Would they relax? Would they watch to see if suspicion landed in the right place? The guilty, they are rarely still in the water, they circle, they check their net." He moved closer to the semicircle of chairs. "And now, the motive. This dagger is valuable, yes, but it is also dangerous to one among us. The inscription, which our learned professor recognized, ties it to a scandal in India, a mutiny, and the actions of an officer whose name is not recorded in polite histories. That officer was the late husband of Mrs. Dale. If the inscription were translated and made public, his reputation, and by extension hers, would be destroyed." There was a long silence. Mrs. Dale's face remained composed, but her hands were still on the armrests. Poirot went on, gently but firmly. "You, madam, had both motive and means. As Lady Margaret's sister, you could take her key unnoticed. You wore a green silk shawl the night the dagger was stolen, leaving the thread in the hinge. You planted the cigarette to lead suspicion to Sir Giles. When Monsieur Trent began to suspect the truth, perhaps after recognizing the name in the inscription, you followed him to the study and struck him, hoping to dissuade further questions. Your perfume betrayed you. And when the search for the dagger grew inconvenient, you placed it near Clara's room, in her scarf, to end the matter entirely. Mrs. Dale's lips curved faintly. A neat theory, Monsieur Poirot. But without proof. Poirot reached into his pocket and produced a small pearl-headed pin in an envelope. Found under the rug in the study after the attack. From the clasp of your shawl, madam. I compared it this morning, your other pins are identical. And when you wrapped the dagger in Clara's scarf, you used the same shawl, for I found a second green thread on the silk itself. That, madam, is the proof. Lady Margaret's eyes closed briefly, then opened with quiet resolve. Rowena, why? Mrs. Dale's voice, when it came, was cool. To protect a name, Margaret. My husband made mistakes, but I would not have him dragged through the mud by men like the professor or dealers like Trent. I did what I thought necessary. Trent, from his chair, gave a sharp laugh. Necessary? You nearly killed me. You were prying, Mrs. Dale replied, without remorse. Poirot stepped back. The guilty, they often believe their actions are justified. But the truth, she does not ask permission to exist. She simply is. Lady Margaret nodded once to Sims, who left the room silently. The police will be here by morning, she said. Mrs. Dale rose, smoothing her skirt as if preparing to host a dinner. Then I shall retire. There is nothing more to discuss. She left without looking back. The fire settled into embers. One by one, the guests drifted away, leaving Poirot by the hearth. He smoothed his moustaches, feeling the comfortable weight of a case completed. Outside, the wind picked up again, but inside, the air was clearer. Poirot allowed himself a small smile. And so, he murmured to the empty room, the curtain falls. Chapter 8, Poirot's Little Grey Cells. Morning at Highfell Court dawned clean and bright, as if the wind had spent the night sweeping away every trace of the storm. The lawn sparkled with dew, the air smelled of wet earth and renewal. Inside, however, the mood was subdued. Mrs. Rowena Dale had not appeared at breakfast. Sims, with his usual discretion, confirmed to Lady Margaret that she remained in her room, awaiting the arrival of the police. Lady Margaret, for her part, conducted the meal as a hostess might during an awkward visit from a distant cousin, gracious, composed, and unyielding to questions. The guests took their places without much appetite. Sir Giles Pembrey read the newspaper upside down for several minutes before realizing it. The professor made a ritual of buttering a roll without eating it, and Clara sat with her hands in her lap, eyes fixed on her untouched tea. Philip Trent, moving carefully so as not to disturb his bandaged head, leaned towards Poirot. "You've made a neat business of it," he said in a low voice. "But I'd like to know, how much was guesswork, and how much was fact?" Poirot smiled, the faintest upward curve of his lips. "All fact, monsieur. Only the order in which I presented them was my own invention." After breakfast, Lady Margaret asked Poirot to join her in the library. The room had been restored to its former state, though the cabinet stood empty, its velvet-lined shelf bare. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, laying sharp lines across the carpet. "Monsieur Poirot," she began, "I owe you an apology, and my thanks. I never thought my own sister capable of such measures." "She believed she acted in your defense," Poirot replied gently. "In truth, she acted to protect herself from the shadow her late husband's name would cast if the inscription became known." Lady Margaret's eyes were steady, but her voice softened. "Rowena has always been proud. perhaps too proud to admit that some histories cannot be rewritten. She turned towards the cabinet. "And what of the dagger? What will become of it now?" "That will depend on the police," Poirot said. "But I would advise, madam, that it be kept in a place where its history may be studied with honesty, and where it cannot be used as a weapon either of violence or of shame." Lady Margaret inclined her head. "Your advice, as always, is sound." The sound of carriage wheels in the drive announced the arrival of the local constable and his sergeant. They were shown to Mrs. Dale's room by Sims, and within a short time she emerged, hat and gloves in place, her expression as composed as ever. She paused only once, at the foot of the stairs, to address Lady Margaret. "I hope," she said, "that one day you will understand why I did what I did." "I understand already," Lady Margaret replied. "But I cannot condone it." Mrs. Dale made no further comment, and a moment later the front door closed behind her. The sound of the carriage rolling away seemed to lift a weight from the air. Poirot gathered the remaining guests in the small drawing room. "It is fitting, I think, that you should all hear the complete account, so that there is no confusion." He began with the theft, Mrs. Dale's opportunity to take Lady Margaret's key, her choice to remove the dagger on a night when the house was lively enough to mask her absence, and her calculated decision to plant misleading clues, a green silk thread from her own shawl in the cabinet hinge, a Turkish cigarette butt by the window to point to Sir Giles. She knew, Poirot explained, that suspicion falls most readily on those with visible habits. Sir Giles, with his distinctive tobacco, and Mademoiselle Clara, with her ribbon, both provided convenient handles for the mind to seize. From there, he moved to the attack on Trent. "Monsieur Trent, you have the eye of a dealer. When you examined the dagger, you must have noticed the inscription's partial translation, enough to recognize a name, or at least its significance. Mrs. Dale saw your interest and realized that her concealment of the dagger could not last. In the study, she struck you to halt your questions. But violence, she is a clumsy servant, it only deepened the mystery." Trent inclined his head. "You're not wrong. I'd begun to think the thing was more than it appeared." Poirot nodded. "Then, when suspicion began to settle in dangerous places, she staged the dagger's discovery. Hidden under a floorboard near Clara's room, wrapped in Clara's scarf, it was a masterstroke of misdirection, except that the dust told me it had been placed there very recently. That, Miss Amos, is where the little grey cells began to sing." The professor, still pale, asked, "And the inscription itself, what does it say?" Poirot's eyes softened. "It names a British officer, praised for his part in suppressing a mutiny in India. But in truth, the inscription is a gift from the officer's enemies, a reminder of the cruelty used. That officer was Mrs. Dale's late husband. She feared its discovery would tarnish both his memory and her own position here." Clara let out a slow breath. "So it was never about the dagger's value?" "No, mademoiselle. It was about the power of history to wound the living." When the guests dispersed, Poirot found himself alone with Sir Giles in the hall. The naval man gave a short, gruff nod. "I'll say this for you, Poirot, you don't miss much." Poirot inclined his head. "A sailor reads the sea, a detective reads the people." Sir Giles chuckled. "Well, here's hoping the waters are calmer now." The afternoon light slanted gold across the drawing room when Clara approached Poirot once more. "I wanted to thank you," she said quietly. "If you hadn't, if you believed what they found." He smiled. "I believe what is reasonable to believe, mademoiselle, until I find reason to believe otherwise. And you must learn not to be so quick to assume the world will turn against you." She managed a faint smile. "I'll try." By evening, the house had begun to shed its tension. Sims saw to the fire, Lady Margaret presided at dinner with renewed composure, and even the professor allowed himself a second helping of pudding. The storm, in more ways than one, had passed. Poirot retired early, but not before one last walk through the quiet halls. He paused by the empty cabinet in the library, its glass doors reflecting his small, neat figure. Objects, he thought, could be beautiful, valuable, even dangerous, but it was the stories attached to them that truly gave them power. And it was always the stories, not the objects, that he sought to set in order. The next morning, as he prepared to depart, Lady Margaret met him at the door. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, "I hope you will visit again, under happier circumstances." "I should like that very much, madam," Poirot replied. "But I warn you, when I visit, trouble has a way of following." Her smile was faint but genuine. "Then perhaps we shall try our best to keep you bored." He bowed, stepped into the waiting car, and glanced back once at the manor, its grey stone brightened by sunlight, its windows glinting like watchful eyes. As the drive carried him away, Poirot reflected that every mystery, however tangled, ends the same way, with the truth standing in the open, and the guilty unmasked. And in that moment, as the countryside rolled past in neat, green order, his little grey cells rested content.